I had been looking forward to my 18th birthday for months. It was supposed to be a milestone, a celebration, a day when I would finally feel like an adult. Instead, it became the day my entire world crumbled. The house I grew up in, the one my real dad built with his own 2 hands, the one filled with memories of happier times, was no longer my home. I still remember the cold look in my stepfather Frank's eyes when he said those words that changed everything. The worst part, my own mother stood beside him silent as I was forced to pack my bags and leave. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt betrayed by someone who was supposed to care for you. My story really begins 8 years before that fateful birthday. I was 10 years old when my dad James died in a car accident. He was everything to me, a successful real estate developer who built our beautiful 2-story colonial home in one of the nicest neighborhoods in Boston. Despite his busy schedule, he always made time for me. Every Saturday morning, we would go fishing at the lake just outside of town, and those remain some of my most cherished memories. Dad was the kind of father who taught me how to throw a baseball, helped with my science projects, and told the best bedtime stories. He had this infectious laugh that could fill the entire house. When he passed away so suddenly, it felt like all the warmth and color drained from my world overnight. My mom Sarah took it hard. She fell into a deep depression for nearly 2 years. I remember trying to be strong for her, making her toast in the mornings before school, and leaving little notes to make her smile. Gradually, she started to come back to life, returning to her job as an elementary school teacher. Things were starting to feel somewhat normal again. Then Frank entered the picture. Mom met him at a school fundraiser when I was 12. He was a financial advisor, always dressed in expensive suits, with not a hair out of place. At first, he seemed perfect. He brought flowers for. Mom took us both to nice restaurants, and even came to my basketball games. Looking back, I can see how calculated it all was. 3 months after they started dating, Frank moved in. 6 months later, they were married in a small ceremony. I remember feeling uneasy during the wedding, but I pushed those feelings aside because my mom was smiling again. Everything changed once the honeymoon was over. Frank started showing his true colors. The first sign was when he moved his prized golf trophies into the living room, replacing the family photos my dad had carefully arranged. When I mentioned it to Mom, she just said, "We need to make room for Frank in our lives, William." Frank had a son from his previous marriage, Thomas, who was 2 years older than me. Thomas would visit every other weekend, and the difference in how Frank treated us was like night and day. Thomas got new sports equipment, the latest video games, and constant praise. I got criticism, chores, and comparisons to Thomas. "Why can't you keep your room clean like Thomas?" Frank would ask. "Thomas is on the honor roll. What happened to your math grade?" The comparisons were endless and exhausting. By the time I turned 15, our relationship had deteriorated completely. Frank controlled the finances with an iron grip. If I needed new shoes for school, it became this whole production where I had to justify the expense, while Thomas got new Jordan sneakers without even asking. The worst part was watching my mom slowly change. She began to defer to Frank on every decision, big or small. When Frank and I argued, she would either stay silent or take his side. It felt like a betrayal each time, a small cut that never fully healed before the next one came. One particularly painful memory was my 16th birthday. Dad had always made birthdays special, with themed parties and thoughtful gifts. That year, I had asked for driving lessons, a reasonable request, since most of my friends were already learning. Frank shut it down immediately. "Driving lessons are expensive, and insurance for teenage boys is through the roof," he said at dinner. "Besides, you can use the bus like everyone else." But Dad promised he would teach me when I turned 16. I argued, feeling my voice crack with emotion. He put money aside specifically for this. Frank's face hardened. "Well, your father isn't here anymore, is he? And whatever money he left went to maintaining this house and feeding you. You should be grateful for that." Mom just looked down at her plate. Later, she slipped me $50 and whispered, "Maybe next year." That was the moment I realized she would never stand up for me against Frank. Our house became increasingly tense over those 6 years. What once felt like a haven now felt like a prison with Frank as the warden. Still, I clung to the knowledge that this was my father's house. He had built it for us, filled every corner with love. No matter how much Frank tried to erase him, Dad's presence remained in the crown molding he had installed by hand, in the height marks penciled on the kitchen doorframe, in the workshop in the basement, where his tools still hung. I counted down the days until I would graduate high school and hopefully leave for college, where I could escape Frank's constant criticism and my mother's disappointing silence. Little did I know that Frank had other plans for my future. The morning of my 18th birthday started like any other day. No special breakfast, no balloons, no wrapped presents on the table. Mom rushed out early for a teacher's meeting, barely pausing to say, "Happy birthday, William. We will celebrate this weekend, okay?" I had planned a small get-together with my 4 closest friends that evening. Nothing wild, just pizza and video games in the basement. When I mentioned it to Frank over breakfast, his response was predictable. "On a Thursday night, absolutely not. Some of us have to work in the morning," he said, not looking up from his financial newspaper. "It is just a few friends, and we will not be loud." I promised, trying to keep the desperation from my voice. "The answer is no. You are not a child anymore, William. Birthday parties are childish." He folded his newspaper with a decisive snap. "Besides, we are not wasting money on pizza for your friends. If they want to eat, they can do it at their own homes." I spent the day at school receiving birthday wishes from friends and teachers, which only highlighted the lack of celebration at home. After school, I decided to pick up a small cake from the grocery store with money I had saved from my part-time job at the local hardware store. If Frank and Mom were not going to make my birthday special, I would do it myself. When I got home, I found a note from Mom saying she would be late due to a parent-teacher conference. Frank was already there watching television in the living room, with a glass of his expensive whiskey. "I got myself a cake," I announced, setting it on the kitchen counter. "Would you like a slice?" Frank glanced at me, with that dismissive look I had grown so accustomed to. "No thanks. Your mother and I are watching our sugar intake." I cut myself a slice and sat at the kitchen table alone, scrolling through birthday messages on my phone. An hour later, Mom finally arrived, looking tired, but carrying a small wrapped package. "Sorry I am late. Happy birthday, sweetheart," she said, giving me a quick hug and placing the gift in front of me. It was a watch, nothing fancy but thoughtful enough. "Thanks, Mom," I said, genuinely appreciative of the effort. Frank joined us in the kitchen, pouring himself another whiskey. "Now that you are 18, we need to talk about your plans," he announced. I had been waiting for this conversation. I have been looking at state colleges. My grades are good enough for a partial scholarship, and I can work part-time to help with expenses. Frank scoffed. "College. With what money?" I thought. "Maybe the money Dad left," I said hesitantly. Mom had occasionally mentioned a small fund my father had set up for me, though details were always vague. Frank's face turned an alarming shade of red. "That money is long gone. Your father left your mother with a mountain of debt, and whatever was left has gone to keeping a roof over your head and food in your stomach for the past 8 years. This was news to me. Dad was successful. He owned his business. How could he have been in debt? Do not speak about things you do not understand." Frank snapped. "The point is, if you want to go to college, you will need to figure it out on your own." Mom interjected weakly. "Maybe we could help him with community college at least." "No," Frank said firmly. "In fact, now that William is 18, it is time he learned to stand on his own 2 feet. I have carried this financial burden long enough." I stared at him, not comprehending what he was saying. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Frank said, leaning forward, "that it is time for you to move out. I have taken care of you long enough. You are an adult now, and adults pay their own way." The words hit me like a physical blow. I looked at my mother in disbelief, waiting for her to object, to defend me, to say something, anything. Instead, she looked away and quietly added, "You need to grow up, William. We cannot support you forever. You are kicking me out. On my birthday, my voice sounded distant, as if it belonged to someone else. "Consider it your final gift from us," Frank said with a cruel smile. "A push into adulthood. You have until tomorrow morning to pack your things." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of shock and heartbreak. I went to my room and mechanically began stuffing clothes into my old duffel bag, tears streaming down my face. How could this be happening? Where would I go? What about finishing high school? I still had 3 months until graduation. At one point, Mom came in and sat on the edge of my bed. "Frank is right, you know. You need to learn independence. It will be good for you." "How is making me homeless good for me?" I asked, my voice breaking. Did Dad really leave nothing for me? Not even enough to help with college? A strange expression crossed her face, something between guilt and confusion. "Your father left some money, but Frank has been managing it." "There were a lot of expenses, William." She left shortly after, and I continued packing in silent desperation. Around midnight, I had gathered the essentials: my clothes, laptop, and a few framed photos of Dad and me. I took one last look at my childhood bedroom, then walked downstairs with my bags. Frank was waiting by the front door, keys in hand. "I need your house key," he said, holding out his palm. As I dropped it into his waiting hand, I caught a glimpse of satisfaction in his eyes. He had won. After 6 years of tension, he had finally found a way to remove the last trace of my father from this house. I called my friend Jake, whose parents agreed to let me stay with them temporarily. As I walked out the door into the cold night air, I heard it lock firmly behind me. In that moment, I felt utterly alone and betrayed, not just by Frank, but by my own mother, who had chosen her new husband over her only son. I spent that first night on Jake's couch, too stunned to process everything that had happened. Jake's parents were sympathetic, but clearly uncomfortable with the situation. They suggested I speak with the school counselor about housing options for the remainder of the school year. The next morning, I skipped school and started searching through my personal documents that I had grabbed in my hasty packing. I needed my birth certificate and social security card if I was going to look for a full-time job and an apartment. While digging through an old folder, I found a business card for Harold Pierce, attorney at law, with a handwritten note on the back in my father's handwriting. "Harold handles all family matters. Contact in case of emergency." I had vague memories of Harold from my childhood, a tall man with kind eyes, who occasionally came over to sign papers with Dad in his home office. On impulse, I called the number on the card, surprised when he answered personally. "Mr. Pierce, you probably do not remember me, but I am William Mitchell, James Mitchell's son." There was a brief pause before his warm voice replied, "William, of course I remember you. You must be all grown up now. How can I help you?" I explained my situation as objectively as possible, though my voice wavered when I described being kicked out on my birthday. Harold listened silently, and when I finished, he let out a long breath. "William, I think you should come to my office immediately. There are some things you need to know." 2 hours later, I sat across from Harold in his downtown office, surrounded by law books and framed certificates. He pulled out a thick file labeled Mitchell Estate and placed it on the desk between us. "Your father was very meticulous about his affairs," Harold began. "When he realized his business was taking off, he created a comprehensive estate plan to protect you and your mother in case anything happened to him." Harold flipped through the documents until he found what he was looking for. "This is your father's will and the trust he established for you. I have been the trustee since his passing, with specific instructions about distributions." He passed me a document pointing to a highlighted section. "According to your father's wishes, the family home was to be held in trust for your benefit until you turned 18, at which point ownership would transfer directly to you. Your mother was granted lifetime residence rights, but the house itself was always intended to be yours." I stared at the paper, trying to comprehend what I was reading. "Are you saying that I own the house?" "The house Frank just kicked me out of," Harold nodded grimly. "Not only that, but there is a substantial trust fund for your education and initial living expenses after high school. Your father made sure you would be taken care of. But Frank said all the money was gone. That dad left us with debt. My mind was spinning. That is categorically false, Harold stated firmly. Your father's business was debt-free and profitable at the time of his death. The trust has been generating income all these years, which should have been accessible for your care and education. A terrible suspicion formed in my mind. Did Frank know about this? Harold's expression darkened. Frank was made aware of the terms of your father's will shortly after he married your mother. As your stepfather, he had no legal right to the assets in your trust, but he was informed about its existence and your eventual inheritance of the house. The betrayal cut deep. Frank had known all along that the house would be mine when I turned 18. That explained his rush to get me out exactly on my birthday, his insistence that I leave immediately. What can I do? I asked, anger replacing my earlier despair. As of yesterday, you are the legal owner of that house, Harold said, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. Frank has no right to evict you. In fact, if anyone has the authority to determine who lives there, it is you. Over the next week, with Harold's guidance, I put together a plan. First, we secured all the legal documentation proving my ownership of the property. Then we discovered something even more disturbing. Frank had taken out a second mortgage on the house, using fraudulent documents, essentially stealing equity that was rightfully mine. I also learned that the trust fund my father left me contained enough money to cover 4 years at a good university plus living expenses, approximately $300,000, that Frank had been deliberately keeping secret from 7, light 200, both my mother and me. With each new discovery, my determination grew. This was not just about reclaiming my home anymore. It was about justice for my father's legacy and intentions. I contacted a real estate attorney who specialized in property disputes to ensure my approach would be legally sound. The attorney confirmed that not only did I have the right to return to my home, but I could legally require Frank to leave given the fraudulent mortgage and his knowledge of the true ownership arrangement. We prepared the necessary papers, including a formal eviction notice for Frank. I also reached out to the bank that held the fraudulent mortgage, providing evidence that Frank had misrepresented himself as the owner. They were extremely interested in this information and immediately froze the home equity line of credit Frank had opened. Through all of this, I stayed with Jake's family, focusing on finishing my senior year despite the turmoil. I did not contact my mother, though the urge to call her and reveal everything I had learned was sometimes overwhelming. But Harold advised patience. Let us handle this properly, through legal channels, he counseled. That way there can be no question about your rights. By the end of April, everything was in place. The property deed had been officially transferred to my name. The bank had initiated fraud proceedings against Frank, and I had a court order confirming my right to occupy my own home. It was time to confront Frank and reclaim what was rightfully mine. The plan was set for a Sunday morning when I knew both Frank and my mother would be home. I arrived with Harold, the real estate attorney, and a police officer who had agreed to be present to keep the peace. As we pulled up to the house, I felt a strange mix of anxiety and determination. This was the home my father built, where I had grown up, where his memory lived in every corner. I was taking it back. The doorbell rang at precisely 10 o'clock that Sunday morning. I stood on the porch of my own house, flanked by Harold, my attorney, Miss Rodriguez, and Officer Bennett. Through the frosted glass panels, I could see a figure approaching, and then Frank opened the door. His initial expression of annoyance quickly morphed into shock when he saw me standing there with 3 adults in professional attire. William, what is the meaning of this? Good morning, Frank, I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. I believe we have some business to discuss regarding the ownership of this house. Frank's face flushed. This is ridiculous. You have no right to be here. I will call the police. Officer Bennett stepped forward, displaying his badge. The police are already here, sir. I am Officer Bennett. May we come inside to discuss this matter civilly? Reluctantly, Frank stepped back, allowing us to enter. My mother appeared from the kitchen, her eyes widening at the sight of our group. William, what is going on? Miss Rodriguez spoke first, her tone professional but firm. Mrs. Davis, I am Emily Rodriguez, representing William Mitchell. We are here because there has been a serious misunderstanding regarding the ownership of this property. We moved to the living room where Harold placed a folder of documents on the coffee table. Mr. Davis, as I believe you were informed shortly after your marriage, this house was held in trust for William until his 18th birthday, at which point ownership would transfer to him. That transfer has now legally occurred. My mother looked bewildered. What? The house is William's. She turned to Frank. Did you know about this? The color drained from Frank's face, but he quickly recovered. This is absurd. James left everything to you, Sarah. These people are trying to manipulate your son into taking what is rightfully ours. Harold calmly opened the folder and extracted several documents. Here is the original will and trust agreement executed by James Mitchell 8 years ago. Here is the property deed showing the transfer to William as of his 18th birthday last month. And here he paused, placing another document on top. Is the acknowledgement form you signed, Mr. Davis, confirming you were informed of these arrangements 6 years ago. My mother snatched the documents, her hands trembling as she read through them. Frank, did you know the house would go to William? Did you know and not tell me? Frank shifted uncomfortably, his confidence faltering. It was a complicated legal situation. I was protecting you, making sure you had security, by fraudulently mortgaging a house that was not yours, miss. Rodriguez interjected, placing another document on the table. The bank is very interested in discussing this second mortgage you took out 3 years ago, claiming to be the owner of the property. My mother looked stricken. You mortgaged our home without telling me. Where did that money go? Frank stood abruptly. This is outrageous. I have been providing for this family for 6 years while this ungrateful boy contributed nothing. Whatever I did was for our benefit. Our benefit. I finally spoke up. You mean your benefit? And what about the trust fund? My father left for my education, the $300,000 you have been hiding from us. My mother gasped, tears filling her eyes. Frank, please tell me that is not true. The look on Frank's face told us everything we needed to know. Officer Bennett stepped forward. Sir, I suggest you remain calm. These are serious allegations with documented evidence. I took a deep breath and delivered the statement I had rehearsed countless times. Frank, as the legal owner of this property, I am exercising my right to determine who lives here. I am asking you to vacate the premises within 24 hours. You cannot do this. Frank shouted, his composure completely gone now. This is my home. No, I said quietly. It is my father's home which he left to me. You have 24 hours to pack your belongings and leave. Mom. I turned to her, seeing the confusion and hurt in her eyes. You have the right to stay, as per Dad's wishes, but that is your choice to make. Frank turned to my mother, desperation in his voice. Sarah, you cannot let him do this. We are married. You have to stand by me. My mother looked from Frank to me, then back to the documents in her hands. You lied to me for years. You took out a mortgage without my knowledge. You kicked my son out of his own house. Her voice grew stronger with each statement. I think you should go, Frank. Now, what followed was chaos. Frank alternated between pleading with my mother, threatening to sue me, and calling Harold every name in the book. Thomas, who had been upstairs, came down to find his father in a full-blown meltdown. Eventually, Officer Bennett suggested that Frank leave immediately to cool down and return the next day for his belongings. After they left, my mother and I sat in stunned silence. Finally, she reached for my hand. William, I am so sorry. I had no idea about any of this. Frank told me your father left us with debts, that he was supporting us, that the house was at risk without his financial management. He lied to both of us, I said, still processing everything that had happened. He knew the house would be mine when I turned 18. That is why he was so eager to get me out exactly on my birthday. The next few weeks were difficult but healing. Frank moved out as required. though not without making threats about contesting the will and suing for the value of improvements he had made to the house. Harold assured us these threats were empty, especially given the evidence of fraud we had uncovered. My mother and I had many long, painful conversations about the past 8 years. She had been manipulated by Frank in ways neither of us had fully understood, isolated from friends and family, made financially dependent. The strong, confident teacher I remembered from my childhood had been gradually diminished under Frank's controlling influence. "I failed you," she admitted one evening, as we sorted through some of Frank's abandoned possessions. "I should have protected you. I should have questioned Frank when things did not add up. We both got fooled," I replied, finding it easier to forgive her than I had expected. "But we get to start over now." With access to my trust fund, I enrolled at the state university that fall, commuting from home to save money. My mother and I established new boundaries and slowly rebuilt our relationship. The house began to feel like a home again, as we removed traces of Frank and restored some of my father's original touches. I later learned that Frank had accumulated substantial gambling debts, which explained the second mortgage and his desperate need to control my inheritance. Thomas reached out to me several months later, apologizing for his father's behavior and admitting that Frank had always been controlling and manipulative with him as well. Through this experience, I learned invaluable lessons about standing up for myself, about the importance of knowing my rights, and about the true meaning of family. My father had tried to protect me, even after his death, and in the end, his foresight had saved me from Frank's schemes. Today, 5 years later, I have graduated college and started my own small real estate development company, inspired by my father's legacy. My mother has returned to teaching full-time and rediscovered her passion for education. Our relationship is different now, more like friends than parent and child, but stronger in many ways. The house still stands as a symbol of my father's love and my own resilience. Sometimes I walk through the rooms and feel his presence not as a ghost, but as a foundation beneath my feet, supporting me as I build my own future. I learned that home is not just about ownership or legal rights. It is about belonging, about honoring the past, while creating your own path forward. Most importantly, I discovered that the best revenge against those who try to diminish you is not anger or retaliation, but success and happiness on your own terms. Have you ever had to stand up to someone who was trying to take advantage of you? Comment below and share your story. I would love to hear how you handled it and what you learned from the experience. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to see more content like this. And do not forget to share with anyone who might be going through something similar and needs to know they are not alone. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, sometimes the most important thing you can do is trust your instincts and fight for what is rightfully yours.